Talking to the students this week about kind of like the topic of today's episode, which is understanding the importance of planning out and structuring out like a schedule, like a study schedule. And I'm not saying a study schedule for the week. I'm talking long term. I'm talking term schedules, yearly schedules, maybe even a high school schedule. The reason why I say that is because kids, they don't really understand how much time and effort they need to put in to each of the subjects, right? And because when they are younger years and the stuff is not as advanced, they don't really capitalize and take advantage of those years, right? Because I'm not sure if you recall, but year 7, year 8 is a lot more play than actually getting down to the nitty gritty. And you went to a top school as well. So even if they did challenge you in class, in school, but you still had a lot of time, right? And some people, they're smart, so they can learn at a lot faster pace because of their upbringing and how their brain was trained since they were baby. But then some kids, they didn't have that same upbringing and that same journey. So therefore, their learning and processing information is quite different. So therefore, especially the ones that take longer to understand information, right? They need more time to be able to compete with the students that don't require a lot of time. Right. But I think we mentioned this in the earlier weeks, last few episodes, that too many times the students mimic those that are coming first. You know, like how much time does first in math spend on math? How much does first in English spend on English? How much does first in science spend on science? And then they think, oh, if I can hit that requirement, if I can match that intensity, then I'll be able to get to where they are. But the fact of the matter is that's you most likely need to spend more time. They are at their top of the grade, at top of the food chain for a reason. So they don't actually have to work as hard because they've already worked hard enough, or they specifically train their brain to think in a certain way that gives them a significant advantage in that subject area versus maybe others. So therefore, coming up with a tailored study approach for yourself, I think is very important. So really understanding what kind of student you are and how much time, what you're naturally gifted in, what you are not so gifted in, and how you're going to use time and effort to kind of make up for those areas that you may be lacking. And the effort will kind of, make up for, I guess, natural talent, if you can call it that. But once you kind of get into high school, you understand what the end goal is going to be, more or less. Majority of kids are targeting to sit the HSC in year 12 or sit the IB final exam in year 12, and they're going to get an ATAR or whatever uni entry score equivalent is if you go into international universities, right? So you kind of already know what the end goal is. There are a few kids that do end up doing like an apprenticeship or go to TAFE or whatnot, which is perfectly fine. And then majority of the kids, I think, still sit the HSC because they don't really know what they want to do. So they need that time to build more fundamental skills. Hopefully within those last 2 years, they find some sort of passion and interest that they can follow. I feel like a lot of parents, they don't understand this one part, especially Asian parents. The parents that haven't grown up here, right, that maybe came here, immigrated to Australia, and now their kids are in the school system, they need to understand that in Australia, the ideology of education is quite different. Australia, especially in primary school, it's mainly play, right? Studying is really not that much. A lot of it is excursions and playing in the playgrounds and that kind of stuff, right? But over here, what ends up happening is once you get to, and you can attest to this, once you get to year 11, the pace picks up 5 times, right? And we mentioned this earlier. What you could do in one term, you're now doing in 2 weeks. So you're doing like 5 topics in the same amount of time that you used to do one topic. Because what they expect the kids to now be able to do is like, okay, you've chosen to pick maths in year 11, year 12, because you have an interest and a certain goal that you want to achieve now, right? And you can now put all your efforts on this and you don't have to worry about the fluff. Remember how in junior high school, it's kind of like you do a bit of art, you do a bit of history, geography, all the basic stuff about Australia that you have to know. But then once you get to year 11, all that stuff is out the window, right? You do 12 units and then 10 units, which is like 6 subjects to then 5 subjects, right? Compulsory.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you spend all your time doing 5 subjects rather than maybe 10 that you were doing in, I don't know, year 8.
Yeah.
Right? So the pace picks up significantly. That transition, a lot of kids are not ready for that. And the parents don't even know that. So there are scenarios where kids come from overseas, they come here, they top of their class in math because they already learned it 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, right? But then once they get to year 11, the tables turn. People that didn't used to perform really well in year 8, year 9, year 10, suddenly start performing significantly better and to a point where you can't catch up anymore. Does that make sense, right? Whereas those kids that used to perform well, they were at the top. So they always were really quite comfortable. And then all of a sudden they can't keep up anymore because they're not aware of that pace change.
Right.
Is that okay?
Okay.
So I feel like we have to start from understanding this because that pace change is so sudden that majority of people, if left untouched, right? If you let the students figure it out themselves, it's too late. Especially the teachers at school, they're very comfortable with teaching at the slow pace, but when it's the faster pace, they flustered themselves. They don't know what to do. Do you remember in year 11, they were going really slowly and all of a sudden it started doing like 2 topics a term, 2 topics a week to make up for, right?
Yeah.
They had to cover all the stuff, but they couldn't. And a lot of the times the teachers try to ease the students in, but they can't ease them in because they have like 10 topics they have to cover this term, right? They just spent 5 weeks on one topic. Now they're like, holy crap, I have 9 topics left to go through. And then eventually it catches up to them, isn't it? So they have to pick up the pace to a point where, because there's not enough time to digest and really practice and hone in on the skill, and they have to move on, right? That the students really just, are at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like all parents and students need to know that this is going to happen, right? And that unfortunately NESA doesn't really pace the content out really well because they don't feel like it's necessary to teach kids trigonometry and calculus in like a year 9, year 10 situation if they don't even know they want to do math. Does that make sense? That's why they only do introductory things like algebra, like the basic equations and that kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
And then once you've chosen it in year 11, year 12, you've committed, therefore they unload everything on you. Okay. Does that make sense, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, and there's no point for a kid that wants to do arts or law or something like that to need to learn calculus in those years because they might not even pick maths, right? They might just end up picking history, economics or whatever anyway. Do you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So I think for students and parents, they need to understand that there's going to be like a sudden change. Okay? But that brings us to a point where if you don't go to selective school, the pace is just off. The kids are just sitting there, right? Not really being challenged on a daily basis. So a lot of time is being wasted. I think majority of students, they can't keep up. They don't understand that the missing ingredients is how much time that needs to pass for them to perfect that subject, right? And therefore they end up not being able to do it. So at ProEd, we understand that, which is why we challenge the year 7 kids, year 8 kids, year 9 kids, because half the time they're not doing anything anyway, right?
Yeah.
So might as well, you know what I mean? Keep them busy, right? Challenge them. Let them learn the fundamentals. Let them improve their reaction time, right? So that when it comes to the harder problem solving, eventually when it comes to year 10, year 11, year 12, that they don't have to spend a lot of effort. You know what I mean? They're very fluent so that they can, really catch on really quickly when the new content comes up.
Yeah.
What you don't want is, because you haven't been, really practicing and your brain is not malleable, right? That it takes you too long to register the basic concepts and how they work in those more kind of specific areas, like the more kind of advanced areas, to a point where they can't handle it. Does that make sense? Right? A lot of the stuff is mental maths, a lot of the stuff is algebra. Those sorts of things you have to practice a lot so that when it comes to real life applications of mathematics, right, that you're not getting stuck because there's one line that's your teacher did an index law, and because you don't know how indices work, you're like, hold on a minute, how did you get that? Where everyone else has already moved on to the next question. Because if you get stuck on that, 5 questions in a row, it's over, right? It's like, you can't even move on to the next lesson. You can't even do homework. Yeah. So it's really to kind of challenge the kids enough during those off years, year 7 to year 9, when they're not really learning much, let's be honest, right? And to build those right habits, to build a good foundation, to build a solid reaction time, a fast reaction time, so that when it comes time to learn the harder stuff, right, that they can catch on really quickly and with relative ease, right? Do you realize from your classes and your school, some of the kids, when they get to year 11, year 12, they can just think much faster than other kids. They're just a lot more creative. They can come up with the right methods so much faster. And some kids are just sitting there, they're contemplating. Some of them start getting they lose a little bit of confidence when they can't come up with their answer straight away, whereas their friends just see the question and they know how to do it immediately, right? A lot of the time is just reaction time. So personally, what I think is, if we break this down into stages, year 7 to year 9, because the kids aren't getting challenged enough in school, that and the parents should take full advantage of those years, because kids are kids, they don't know, right? They just want to play, right? They don't understand that by wasting this time, it's going to really catch up to them in the later years, right? But it's okay, you can let them play it for a bit, but at the same time, like, there's so much time. There's enough time to learn harder things and still play at the same time, you know? Right. I'm not saying you need to do the HSC in year 10. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying, like, find a good balance and not just all play, right? Make sure that the students are getting challenged, you know, so that they do find the subject matters interesting and rewarding. Do you know what I'm saying? And obviously, when they're doing these harder questions that, you know what I mean, that they can really make them stand out when they do the easiest stuff at school, right? Because they're just going to get all the questions right because they've already learned past a little bit of what is being examined in school. Now, a lot of parents and students say, why do we have to learn past it? Well, let's be honest. Whether you go learn more today in year 8 or not, you're still sitting the HSC at the end of the day, right? In year 12, no matter what. So I could hibernate year 7, year 8, year 9, and year 10, and then just learn everything year 11, year 12. Or I can pace myself and understand that regardless of what happens, I still have to learn this much content. I can learn all this content in 1 year, or I can learn this content in 6 years spread out. Do you agree? Right? And what do you think is easier? Spreading out so that you don't have to learn too much, or really getting, you know what I mean, a lot of pressure put on you in the later years because, you know, you've wasted so much time in the early years, but you still have to know the stuff. It's not like that stuff is not going to be examinable. Would you rather pace that out over 6 years, or would you rather just focus on it in the last 2 years? I feel like that's a very easy question to ask or answer, right? Pacing it out really takes a lot of pressure off the kids so that, you know, they can still learn and get to that level of, let's say, for example, 4 in maths is the ultimate goal, that they will be able to tolerate and handle that capacity, that difficulty, right? Because they've spread out their work over time.
Yeah.
Right? And then they don't have to do 10 hours of math a week. They don't have to do 2 hours because they've already done the 8 hours spread out, you know, in the earlier years.